Labor's electric vehicle strategy is on course to fail, as estimates suggest fewer than a third of new cars bought by 2030 will be battery operated. The Federal Transport Department calculates EVs will make up 27% of sales. The target is 89%. That was based on Anthony Albanese's pre-election promises, such as EV tariffs and tax exemptions. The other big one would be fuel emission standards. The National Senator Matt Canavan says the figure is indicative of the high costs of electric vehicles.
Only a third of Australians, on the government's own figures, only a third of Australians are going to be able to afford an electric car. The cheapest electric car starts over $40,000, and they're the very base models. You're really looking at $50,000, $60,000 to get a decent electric car, and obviously only the very wealthy can afford that.
Joining for more on this, Electric Vehicle Council CEO Behyad Jafari, thanks for your time. So what do you make of this current figure, and is it really going to be that far below the government's current target?
No, what I'd say is the government's certainly right to be ambitious in this space. We've actually, just as of this month, we've seen that in 2023, electric vehicle sales are 10 times higher than they were in all of 2021. That's certainly much higher than projections were at the time. And I think the government's been able to see that they've brought a few of their policies, not all of them, into place already. And they've had a tenfold increase from a pretty low number, but a tenfold increase in sales. So if they can do that again, they're sitting pretty, of course. But at the same time, the very biggest of those policies, fuel efficiency standards that bring our market in line with places like the USA, the EU, New Zealand, bring more electric vehicle options to Australians, as well as more fuel-efficient hybrids and petrol and diesel vehicles, haven't been put in place yet. And what we can see is that as you make more EVs available to Australians in different shapes and sizes, they're buying them.
I mean, it's interesting. There seems to be a little bit of a global lack of demand just at the moment from what Ford's doing. But you alluded to the biggest change that hasn't happened here, fuel emissions standards. So how would they work, do you think? And can they work in a fair manner to make sure that people that wouldn't be getting an EV in that transition phase in particular, not basically getting slugged for people that are getting an EV?
So just quickly on your first point, globally electric vehicle sales are up about 50 to 60% compared to this time last year. In Australia, it's more like 200% compared to this time last year. So while individual brands may have different tactics within that, as a market as a whole, consumers are certainly very excited and buying more EVs. When it comes to fuel efficiency standards, there's essentially a set of rules that are provided to car companies. As I mentioned, every developed country in the world, except for Australia and Russia, already has these in place. And it says to them that if you sell a diesel ute or a petrol hatchback or an electric car, you have to make them more efficient and you have to make them available to our market. So for Australia, we're not asking any car company to invent a new type of car. We're saying you're already selling them in the USA and in New Zealand and everywhere else. Come and make them available to Australians. And what we can see is every time that happens, when a new model enters into our market, prices go down, the amount of charges are going up every year, more and more Australians are buying electric vehicles as well.
So what's out there right now that would be competitive though? Because the vast majority of EVs that I see on the road seem to be pretty upmarket ones. Hearing some of the price tags, they can be very expensive. If we could get the cheapest ones in the world to Australia, what price are we talking about at the moment?
So just to give you an example, in just this year, we've gone from no electric vehicles available in Australia priced under $40,000 to now having 3 available in that price point. And I know Matt Canavan, as usual, said some pretty silly things earlier on your show. We're actually finding that people buying electric vehicles, even some of what you think of upmarket models like Teslas, the largest population centres of those are in places like Blacktown and Parramatta in Western Sydney or South Werribee in Melbourne. It is more sort of middle income families looking to avoid the high cost of petrol, saying, yes, maybe I'll spend a bit more to buy the car up front, but then I'll save a lot more after that. And so it really is about, as I say, both making different makes and models of cars available for people. And for a lot of these models, it's also about increasing the volume of them. The big challenge that we have in EVs is that for a lot of car brands, they're finding that customers are lined up either on their websites or on dealerships wanting to buy those cars, but they sell out very quickly because their head office is sending those cars to Europe, to USA, to other countries saying, these countries have these standards in place and you don't. So that puts you at the bottom of our list.
Yeah, and so when we're looking as well at the big sector that's been growing in Australia so far. Larger, medium, I guess, to large SUVs seem to be more and more popular. Is the reality that if they're petrol driven, they would get a bit more expensive under whatever laws would come in, they would bring in?
I mean, these things depend on the laws, but and I think what most people have been saying is that we should make our standards fall in line with, for instance, places like the USA where these already exist. So we're not saying Australia should trail its own path and create something that's unique or different from everyone else. It's just level that playing field. So if you look in the USA, for instance, their most popular selling car is the Ford F-150. It's about 1.5 times the size of the Toyota Hilux or the Ford Ranger, to give you an impression of the size of those vehicles. They have these standards in place. They've had them in place since the 70s. What they find is that they can drive the same type of cars that they want, but the car company has to invest in the technology to make that car use less petrol. Of course, they also provide electric vehicle options of those utes there as well, but make sure that they use less and less petrol every year. It's essentially a transfer of what would be profits to car companies to say you have to make your cars use less fuel so that that money goes to consumers.
We'll see what Labor comes up with and perhaps talk about it then. Behyad Jafari, thanks for your time.
Thank you.